Hello, everyone. I'm Dr. Thunder, and this is Case Closed. Case Closed. And that's a collaboration with Ike Ogiamian with an all star panel. And today is Father's Day. Happy Father's Day for those fathers out there. But are fathers obsolete? Are fathers obsolete in our era, in this modern era? Is fatherhood a thankless job in the modern era? What should a man expect in return for taking the responsibility of fatherhood? Are fathers overrated? And today, a bunch of single mothers are also celebrating Father's Day because they're the mother and the father. So are fathers overrated? What are fathers doing to get custody of their kids? What states have the most favorable family courts? And is there a template for effectively seeking justice within the family court system? We'll be talking about that and more today on Case Closed. Let's go. Warning: some viewers may find the following video disturbing. Viewer discretion is advised. What is happening, gentlemen?
Hey, 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 hey. How's it going? Happy Father's Day to you and LAR and all the other fathers out there. How's it going, LAR? I guess our friend is still having some difficulties.
Okay, there you go. Here, let me tighten this up here.
There you go. There you go.
Uh oh.
Got
Now
it.
he's
Uh, I could tell
wait a
he
minute.
wasn't at a place with great internet, but hopefully he'll be coming down in here. Now, while we get those things sorted out, let me just go ahead and state a few things. I'll typically, a day like Father's Day is for your personal appreciation for your actual personal father or between you and your offspring and the family, and also perhaps in general a way to appreciate the whole notion of fatherhood. Now, if things are going well, generally speaking, given the nature of men and whatnot, this should not be a day that should be filled with all kinds of pomp and circumstance, generally speaking. So if one is going to sit and have a conversation about fatherhood in the modern era, it'll be to emphasize certain areas where there are crises or some communities where there might be some crisis. And generally speaking, there is a trend of crisis with perhaps it being worse in certain communities than others, right? And this has to do with, let's say, the absence of fathers. A father's just a wallet book, just protection and provision. And if protection and provision can be outsourced from the home, then what's the big deal then? What's the big deal? Right? So LAR, seems like you're well situated.
I think so. Can you hear me now?
Yes, sir, yes,
Yes,
sir, yes, sir.
Sorry about that.
it's all right.
No problem, LAR. So man, let's start with you then. Okay. Are fathers overrated? Okay, a father's overrated. It's just a question of, if the resources are there, if it's just about money, why are we still talking about this old notion of family? How quaint. What is this, the 1950s? Or if we're talking about certain communities and then being, shall we say, behind in certain areas, oh, let's stop talking about families. It's about resources. You're just kind of muddying the waters by talking about this family stuff. It's really about getting the resources to these communities. Fathers and I, we can do without fathers. What do you say about that? Are fathers overrated?
No, I think fathers are underrated. I think um, fathers are, in some ways, expected to do both jobs and then some, even if they're there or from afar. And I think fathers get no credit, get a very small amount of credit, but a very large amount of blame. So I think fathers are pretty much underrated in society because at
Good.
the end of the day, we want somebody to. It's ironic if you fail. It's because you didn't have a father, or because your father wasn't involved enough. But if you succeed, it's because of you and your mother. And unfortunately, in our society, we have more failures than we do successes. So that's where I get that from.
Makes sense, makes sense, makes sense. And we're going to get to this notion here shortly about the credit, right? About the kind of credit. And this would be from an individual, from a man's point of view and the male psyche. We'll get in there. But Dr. Thunder, right? You heard LAR. And shout out to the people in the chat. Go ahead and, as Dr. Thunder said, is in the chat, go ahead and click that like button and share. But are fathers overrated? Because now this is a question that sounds like it's tongue in cheek, but within the political arena, when you start talking about family, there is a segment of the political spectrum that will tell you that these are quaint ideas that are really not getting at the heart of the issue. And the heart of the issue is about the resources and stuff like that. That's why this community is not as far ahead as it should be. All this stuff about family and cisgender heteronormativity, and you know the so a
Absolutely.
father's overrated.
um, no, fathers are not overrated. Um, And I my okay, so my older brother and his oldest son just graduated from high school, and so they had and he had a graduation earlier, a couple weeks ago. So graduation a couple weeks ago, but then had uh, like a reception kind of a graduation kind of party kind of thing yesterday, and so you know most of the siblings family, I've got three siblings: my older brother, my younger brother, and younger sister, and they're twins, younger brother and sister. And my older brother is a computer like a security. Um, uh, he writes security software. Okay, so he's and he's got a big salary. My younger brother is a military guy, and my younger sister, she's a psychiatrist. Okay, and I'm a tenured professor. All of this is testament to our dad, and he was there, of course, at the event. His first grandchild to graduate from high school, and the sort of pomp and circumstance associated with that, big deal. Um, and I think about how unusual our family is in the black community to have both parents, and then but how actually pretty I don't want to call it common, but you wouldn't be surprised if families in other communities uh, had the sort of success that our family does. With all the kids, we're all married, we all got kids, we're all, you know, doing the thing, all that. Um, but in the black community, it is not the common thing for our dynamic to be present, and the reason is because of the absence of fathers. And so it kind of gives you an idea of how important, how critically important fathers are. And it's a lot of intangible stuff. There are, of course, the tangibles, the providence, the protection, you know, um, and even you could talk about stuff like discipline and structure and organization and focus and, teaching your kids not to quit and all that kind of stuff, stick to itiveness, intestinal fortitude, all of that kind of stuff. But then there's a lot of intangible stuff. And there's these sort of staving off uh, predators, disproportionately uh, kids that don't have their fathers in the house. There are they are victims of predators. You know, predators that act like that they're into the mom. The mom is just happy to have some attention, and then that leaves them open for and makes them susceptible. Not all the time, not all the time, but disproportionately that is the case. The father protects the family, so fathers are not overrated. And in fact, fathers are so important that single mothers have started celebrating Father's Day because they know they're trying to. It's like a snub. It's like, hey, we're the mother and the father. It's like a snub like this, but it actually is a tipping of the cap to how important fathers are. That they would even say, hey, we're taking Father's Day too. So, anyhow,
Mm.
what's happening, Chantel?
Indeed, indeed. What's happening? Shout out to you, OG panelist on this show from back in the day. Now, it's interesting that you bring up the non tangible aspects because we just talked about the tangible as perhaps replaceable. Hey, how about if you just protect and provide for these people, and as a group, you give them these resources? Isn't that what it's all about? Why are we relating certain outcomes to the structure of certain families? After all, isn't this just all cisgender heteronormativity? And we need to think outside the box and get more creative and all those kinds of things. Now, you mentioned the non-tangibles here, right? The non-tangibles are that spirit, which perhaps one could call the stoic spirit, which is required for you to be able to perform the protection and provision, right? So the thing is, yes, sure, if you have the protection and the provision being piped into you via some impersonal mechanism like the government, you're not going to learn about that stoic spirit, which is very important, by the way. Okay, for the psychological development of anybody, you're not going to learn about how those resources got produced, how the protection actually happens, and whatnot. And this stoic spirit is about dealing with the external environment, which, by the way, the external environment is not going to disappear. It's not going to go away. It's still going to be there. And when you go out there, you might find yourself deficient in many different regards if you do not have someone that has kind of taught you those things. You mentioned some of the attributes, characteristics, virtues, if you will, such as delayed gratification. You didn't necessarily say that, but that'd be one of them, right? Um,
Absolutely.
Now, let me ask you this, LAR, and we'll go to Dr. Thunder here, because let's go into just in the psyche of a man, an individual man, or man in general. What I'm trying to get at here is, generally speaking, there's a philosophical school of thought that makes sense, that says, look, human beings make these social contracts based on our nature, right? So you're going to have to give me something if you want me to take on the responsibility of fatherhood, for example. Or if I'm going to be a warrior, you're going to need to give me something, right? Which is glory, both here and in the afterlife, okay, or whatever. My name will forever ring for eternity. Those kinds of things are part of the social contract. So I may start by answering the question in a traditional sense. Um, as a West African, let's say, right? It's kind of it's simple. What do men want? Men want respect. It doesn't go beyond that. It doesn't. It's just simple, and people don't even, obviously, people don't question those kinds of things because those are just kind of basic. Men want respect. The respect the man. Respect your husband. Respect. That is what he wants in order to take on the responsibility. You don't start asking, oh, why does he want this is the deal. Okay, you respect me, that's what I want, right? And as an individual man, I think that kind of perhaps makes sense. But I want to ask you, LAR, just kind of freshly there, because I'm talking from perhaps a cultural perspective. What do you, as a man, or what do you representing men want, right, for taking on this responsibility? Because it's not free. No, no, it doesn't work that way, right? You mentioned about credit before. What does this form of credit look like for you? What do men want in order to take on this responsibility?
Well, respect is one of them. Another would be a functional adult when it's said and done. And the other would probably be mm, reverence, for at least for the sacrifices made. Um, I think that pretty for me that pretty much covers it, because most guys, in a sense, the worst. I think the worst thing to have as a father is a kid that didn't grow up to be a functional adult. That's the worst thing, and it's like so fathers come to play like, well, if you're a functional member of society, I did a good job. If you're dysfunctional, not a good job. And the reason I say that in reverence for the sacrifice, because sometimes, for the most part, um, most children only realize what happened when they become adults and look back at, okay, they did this and that and this and that. So, the reverence comes in later, because unfortunately, for the vast majority of fathers, we don't necessarily get the reverence until 10, 20 years later, you know. So that's what I got think in my opinion.
Hmm. And that makes yeah, and generally speaking, yes, from the individual child, you're not gonna get that until later. And then if there's a general lack of reverence for fatherhood in the society at large, then you things start to break down. This is a contract after all, and people are selfish. People are not just gonna keep on doing things forever if the situation is not such that if there's no deal there, no social contract there, if men are not getting what they want, they're not gonna go to war or all these things, right? But Dr. Thunder, you heard what Eliar said, basically saying, hey, he added an interesting aspect about you owe it to your dad, like so, owe it to become a fully functional adult. Otherwise, you're not respecting the sacrifice that he put in, right? So reverence and respect, and as if you were raised by that, yeah, you owe it to become a functional adult. What do men want as a return for taking on the responsibility?
Oh yeah, most of it is respect. I did a video earlier this week. Well, I guess this is the first day of next week, so it was probably Wednesday or Thursday. It was one of my Car Thunder episodes, and let's see, what was it called? You must pre qualify for the order of protection, for the vertical order of protection. You must pre qualify for the vertical order of protection. And this pre qualifying, it goes for men and women. Now, the difference is that society has no problem stating clearly and women expressing what their pre qualifications are for getting in line, for uh, for joining, joining forces, for becoming part of that vertical order of protection, via marriage, via a long term relationship. They don't. There's no problem with that. But when men express what their standards are, they get treated like that brother on the OWN network, on Put a Ring on It, where all he did was say that in order for someone to qualify for my protection, he didn't say it in these words, I just don't want them to be a single mother. That was really what started off them coming at him like gangbusters. Um, it's frowned upon for a man to express his standards. Right now, that's really all he wants. All he wants is a woman that has certain characteristics. He's not expecting to use the woman as a resource. He's not going to try to take money from the woman. He doesn't care if she has any money. He doesn't care if she ever becomes capable of providing, financially. He doesn't care about any of that. All he cares about is a sense of respect, particular qualities that he wants the woman to possess, and and likely the ability to have kids. That's really all the guy wants. It's really a really low uh, expectation, right? And this is what's so crazy about this is that we would even have to have a conversation. Uh, you know, we would even have to have a conversation about what these qualifications are because there's such small qualifications, especially when you compare them to what women want. You got to be able to pay for stuff. You got to be able to buy the house. You got to be constantly developing and growing and becoming, you know, more industrious, more profitable. Getting stronger and stronger, increasing your ability to make money and get all of the things and provide for all of the children and do all of this kind of stuff. So the man's responsibility continues to grow and all he wants is just a basic level of respect. All he wants is a woman that is willing to submit to his authority so that he can protect her. That's all.
Mm. So it seems to be a very functional kind of form of tit for tat. Well, not necessarily. In other words, give and take, exchange.
Right.
functional in the sense that, like you said, in order to be able to run this classroom, I need, if I'm responsible for the classroom, you need to, you know, do what I say, right?
Right.
Otherwise, it's like, it does not work. And also, overall, it seems to be a very, very simple trade-off. Now, you're saying something here that maybe I'm not the most. You say there should it's you're surprised that there should be even a conversation. And yes, it does seem like a hey, all this big responsibility on the other side, all you're asking for is respect. Um, again, I mentioned West African culture, or you can even take Indian culture or whatever, where it's kind of like it's all those kind of simple, unquestioned things where things are still just kind of on that when you talk about tradition, right? Tradition is not it's not a philosophical thing. Where by that I mean you don't sit and debate tradition. You don't come, it's not a contract you sit and think it's just men should be respected, right? And then people just kind of go brought up in there, they're indoctrinated in that, and they go with it. So you're saying that there's certain places now where it's being debated, and I'm going to ask LAR: is this idea of what men want misunderstood in certain communities? Is it do people kind of snare at or look askance at a man saying I want respect? Do they understand even? It's not like you actually have to understand, but is there difficulty in understanding or giving men what they want in order to take on this responsibility?
No, I don't think it's difficult. I think just people enjoy being rebellious.
Yeah.
I think when it comes to men and fathers, husbands in particular, people get some type of perverted enjoyment out of disobeying or um, not even disappointing, but just manipulating the situation because that men, fathers, and husbands are viewed in a villainous type of way in society. So as long as you do something to the bad guy, it doesn't really count. Unfortunately, um, the very people that demonize men, fathers, and husbands are the very people that run back to men, fathers, and husbands when the wheels fall off of all of their rebellious behavior.
Yep.
So it, it's a weird, catch 22 on both sides.
Interesting, Dr. Thunder. And if you could start queuing up 1125, you probably have 1125 queued up or something. And
I do.
basically, it's a here we have a little clip here, one of the first of perhaps a number of clips we're going to be kind of investigating in this show. Shout out to Glenn Lowry, Professor Glenn Lowry. Go ahead and check out his channel, The Glenn Show. He's a professor of economics at Brown University, amongst many other kind of academic honors and whatnot. Yeah, kind of a big shot type of guy, right? And here we're going to talk about the Black community, the state of the Black family. How did it start to go wrong? Why it went wrong? Some people have a historical perspective as to what actually happened, but there's still debate as to why exactly it happened. Okay, and here I think they're going to discuss briefly the 1960s. So just go ahead and play it, and we'll stop probably like a minute or two into it.
Sure. Before I do that, like, share, comment, subscribe, become a channel member where you'll get access to all archived videos. Support Black male media, support independent media. Super chats enabled. Super thanks for the replay gang, Cash App, Venmo, PayPal, Dr. Thunder Music. All one word, spell out the word doctor, and join the Sandwich Gang. Become a member of the Sandwich Gang by shooting me a Cash App for a sandwich. And sandwich is spelled with 2 M's. Please indicate the accurate spelling. All right, here we go.
Why is it clearly something happened in the 60s that reversed? Because up until the 60s, Black marriage rates, children born to married couples, was not very different than white numbers. So this is not a legacy of slavery. It's not something that's because of poverty, because certainly in the 40s and 50s, Black families were incredibly poor. Uh, so,
Let me just mention,
yeah,
Bob, excuse me for interrupting. Excuse me. I want you to go on. Herbert Gutman, The Black Family in Slavery and Freedom. That's the book
Yes.
that people need to consult. This is a social historian. The book is published in the 1980s, if I'm not mistaken, but it nails this point that you were talking about. If you look from emancipation into the Depression, what you see is a lot of coherence, a lot of low out of wedlock birth rates, high marital rates, and stuff like that. It's only post 1960, 1965, when Moynihan started to become aware that you begin to see the kind of things that we're talking about, or at least post World War II. So that's a really important point. But go ahead.
Right. You know, it's because, well, so, there's one theory that the welfare system is the culprit.
Right.
That is, you could get welfare if you weren't married. And so you have the real increase was in the 70s and the 80s in the rate of illegitimacy. When Moynihan wrote, it was, 25% of Black children were born out of wedlock. And by the time you get to 2000, it's at 68 to 70%. And it sort of stayed there since. So something happened and even in the 90s, it had already been up high. So it's really in the 70s and the 80s. And one argument is that welfare reform released Black men from responsibility and, in fact, made it costly because if they married, you wouldn't get all these benefits. The other argument is unemployment. And that was something William Julius Wilson wrote about in the 1980s, the lack of employable Black men. So I think, both of those things are there. But for
You pause it
me,
there, Dr. Thunder.
it's the kind of.
So we know the stats, we know the timeline, we know that prior to the 60s, things were a certain way. And then afterwards, things changed. People say it must be welfare. Seems very nice and clean. Seems a little too clean almost, right? What do you think of that argument? And perhaps one thing that comes to mind is perhaps it highlights, not that, perhaps it highlights that perhaps it's not about giving people stuff that's a bad thing, but if you give them stuff prior to taking care of certain underlying factors having to do with their capacity to hold on to that stuff, maintain the stuff, levels of education, levels of financial literacy. You like that, LAR, literacy? But anyways, continuing on with that. That was a reach
Cut
throwback,
it out.
2 weeks now, 2 weeks ago. But anyways, so do you there's an importance to the order of things. It seems like, hey, if I'm somebody that I have my good reading and writing skills and I'm going to community college to take certain vocational things and I'm trying to get my certificates and I have a good head on my shoulders, hey, you throw me an extra $400 every quarter because of this, that, the other, that might not be a bad thing. But if I don't have these skills or if I don't have certain things already set up and you throw money in there, then it's horrible. What I'm trying to say is I'm not exactly sure that giving people money is a bad thing. It's the conditions under which you give them money and what has not been done prior to giving them money and so on and so forth. But what are your comments generally about this thing about the 60s?
Are you talking to me or to LAR?
Yeah, Dr. Thunder first. Sorry.
Okay, yeah. Um, yeah, I mean, it is true that prior to the 60s, marriage rates were much higher in the Black community, more comparable to the white community, and in some time periods, actually uh, higher in the Black community than in the white community. Um, but what happened was uh, through the sort of incentivized, uh, you know, it required someone within the Black community, a group of folks within the Black community, to be willing to collaborate with the oppressor, as it were, and to convince them that this is a better deal. So take this deal, and they took the deal. right? And we're talking about women choosing the state over their men. And it's hard for a single individual to out out earn what the state can grant. Simultaneously, it it knocks the legs out of this vertical order of protection that I talk about, where the woman is able to still uh, gain enough resources to survive, to live, and in many cases, perhaps to live better than she would have. But in addition to that, she can maintain her own independence. So what the trade was you don't have to submit, and you're going to live at least as well. That was the trade. And that's a hard trade. That's a hard trade not to take. That's a hard deal not to take. I'd argue that with the way that human nature is, anyone that was offered that deal disproportionately would have taken that deal. Okay. And so, yes, they took the deal. They shouldn't have taken the deal. They were out of pocket for taking the deal. But pretty much anyone would have taken the deal. And so, really, the culprit, the person to point the finger at, is the incentivizing structure. And so, when you hear people talk frequently about stop pointing at, you're pointing at women, you're pointing at these people over here, you're pointing at each other. Really, you should be pointing at the structure that's causing this. The white supremacist structure that caused this. Why is it that they would have wanted to destabilize the black community? What is it that they would have gained from that? Okay. And yeah, so I think answers to those questions are more valuable when trying to figure out who to point the finger at. Um, yeah, I, I don't know if that directly answered the question, but
No,
but there
it's
you go.
yeah, it was a request for commentary, and I think that you addressed the request. Now, something that you mentioned there regarding agency, regarding someone whom might have seen, right? Like, hey, if I put this fuel over, there's a whole bunch of fuel over there, and I can start a fire by introducing free money without someone having to submit, and it'll burn that community more than others. Why would it burn that community more than others? Because in that it was mentioned in the clip that we just played that, yeah, in the 40s and the 50s, black families were poor. So the
Yep.
poverty being overrepresented as being in the poor numbers, if you will, leaves you susceptible to taking that deal more than others. Because I'm
One
sure
hundred
there
percent.
are other, yeah, there are other poor
It was
groups
the least.
too.
Okay, and if the desire was to take some group of people and permanently destabilize them, and say for instance, this was not a strictly sort of racist uh, decision. Okay, so say for instance, they're just like being pragmatic about it. Who can we destabilize for the least amount of money?
Mhm. Yeah.
There you go.
So you have poor people everywhere taking on that deal. You said, hey, it's human nature. I'm going to grab onto this deal. But if your group, generally speaking, and poverty is a relative thing in terms of like relative to the other people in that society are overrepresented in the poverty thing, then you're going to be disproportionately affected by the destabilizing effects of this particular policy here. That's an interesting uh, uh, notion there. But LAR, let's go to you here with regards to the 1960s. You know the stats, right? We've heard it before. This clip was played, and people say, "Hey, it must be the welfare policies." Now, that claim is a political football in the sense that there are people, there's side of the political spectrum that says, no, you're just trying to blame, the government, or you just don't want to help people. You're always talking about, well, the government and government spending is always the bad guy. I mean, they might even call you a bootstrap, bro. Shout out to Dr. Thunder, right? But what are your thoughts here about 1960 and what exactly happened there? Go ahead, Elio.
1960, I've said it before, Jim Crow, the Civil Rights Movement, Vietnam War, and really the introduction of heroin, you know, at that time, that extended to the next second wave of crack cocaine was all the 60s. But also, pretty much from the 60s to the 80s was basically the end of the industrial age. So when we talk about how black men are leading tradesmen and skillsmen in America, that came from that era. It was, people talk about you went to high school and you worked at the plant, but 9 times out of 10, you knew how to do electrical work or woodwork or work on cars or weld or something of that nature. And basically, as you see from the 60s to the 80s, in my opinion, all of that started withering away. And the issue became, when we talk about the welfare state, is something you said prior. People were poor in the 40s and 50s. Pretty much all of America was poor in the 40s because that was pretty much the end of the Great Depression. So you needed some separation, because I think the Great Depression ended in 39, if I'm not mistaken. See, 39 or 49, but I think 39. So the separation is needed. Our community, yeah, we were poor, yeah, we were married, but you started seeing actual people owning things in the 50s and 60s. That's part of the civil rights movement, where people got mad about integration, because in integration we started losing our own businesses, the last wave of them, basically. you know so when the welfare thing came up, to me it adds to the equation of what we forget about welfare and child support and all that is, you're getting two checks, not one. You're still getting one from the government, but you're getting one from the person. So part of the divorce and the single epidemic is, you get a check from the government, you get a check from a guy, and you can go to work and get a check. So now you have a society who's predominantly, the women were super greedy and notorious for mismanaging money. So what you see is the human element of, I can get over. The government has sanctioned me getting over, and I'm going to do it. And you see, when people talked about the welfare queens in the 80s and using taxpayers' dollars and all that, that came from the idea of, wait a minute, if the government's paying you, that means I'm paying you, and I know the guy's paying you, and what are you doing? Nothing. So that whole thing went downhill. And if when you see other communities, most other communities really are doing the same thing, but they're more, and how can I say this? They're more in tune to get away with crime and get more business loans from the government. So it covers it up a little bit more. Well, that's my thoughts on that one.
Yeah, and it's also interesting too, and it's not just what you said right now. It's also, I mean, you've repeated the same theme about what other communities do in other broadcasts. And one of the differences is they still manage to keep their family intact, though. With all their craziness, shadiness, crime, cheating, whatever, well, they talk everything, right?
Absolutely.
Concubines, everything. But somehow they keep that family thing together there. And then it
Let me
seems
ask a
to
question.
be, go ahead.
Do you think those other communities have the same governmental interference? Because I didn't hear the stories of other groups having people come and check out if the men were in the house or not.
Mhm. Yeah,
Because I know that didn't happen in the white
yeah.
community.
Yeah, so the way that they write these laws is technically they're supposed to be applied across the board, but disproportionately they get applied. You know what happens? They, when they're, well, this is another random check, and for some reason it ends up being the same folks over and over and over that are the random the ones that are the randomly selected, um, which is uh, frustrating in the usual way. Something else I wanted to mention, and because you said something, Ike, that I think is really important. No matter what dysfunction, no matter what goofy stuff was going on, such and such is cheating, what's the name went to jail, no matter what happened, they seem to figure out how to keep their families together. I wonder if this sort of um, the love, being in love, and uh, happiness, marital satisfaction, all of that kind of stuff. I wonder if that stuff is more targeted towards poor people and black people than it is targeted towards wealthy folks, because that is another way that you can convince people to break their own homes up and destabilize your community. What's happening, lead attorney?
Mhm. No, uh, the point that you okay. So I've thought about that a couple of times, several times. Now I don't know the exact answer, but I do believe now whether it's targeted or not. But I think that the black community is very postmodern in its hyper individualism, hyper um it's these ideas of love and this is and that's right. If you look at more traditional, am I saying postmodern as opposed to traditional? Even though I know that this is not, I'm painting in broad strokes here. There are many ways in which the African American community is very traditional, but in a particular, in this regard here about the love and the this and the that, and things have to be just right, especially with the women, there seems to be a lot of that has been swallowed up. Now, speaking as a Nigerian, uh, Nigerians behave very badly in their marriages, as everybody else kind of does, generally speaking. Probably even worse, right? But the divorce rate is less than 1%, which is just kind of unfathomable in the West, right? How the hell you not even 1%? That's insane. But it's because the idea of what a family looks like is very different from everything that you hear out here. It's not about happiness and this and that, and oh, if it's not perfect, then the kids need to be let out because you don't want the kids to see. It's like, no, the kids are gonna see all kinds of things, okay? But at the end of the day, mom and dad is still there, okay? And the kids end up doing better because of that, as opposed to this notion of, oh, I can do bad all by myself and all these other kinds of things. So I agree that it is manifested more in the African American community. I don't know if it was a result of a particular kind of targeting that blah, 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 such and such. But interesting point, generally speaking. But game changer, you're coming in here. I'm going to ask you two rapid fire questions here because you're just starting now. I want to ask you this. Is fatherhood overrated, in your opinion, sir?
When you say fatherhood is overrated, you're talking about to the father itself, themselves, or to just general
Society,
society.
to general society that would say, hey, it's just about protection and provision. If we have these systems in place that can channel in, funnel in protection and provision, give them resources, what's the point? Hey, fathers, whatever, they can do whatever.
No, most certainly not. Basically, fatherhood is more than provisions and protections. It's really a series of behaviors that's passed down from generation to generation. Once it's cut, it's cut. Here in this country, we have like there's a theme whenever they want to create the trope of a successful man. They always say like, this is such and such, the second or the third or the fourth. And really, it means that this person, like Martin Luther King Jr., et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, comes from a long line of, a paternal order, essentially, that the fathers were there intact and, passed on their legacy to that son. That legacy is then built upon each generation, improving said sons, to compete with other tribes. Unfortunately, ours has been broken because we feel that fatherhood is something that can be substituted or subsidized by the government.
Question number 2 there. What does a man require in order to take on the responsibility of fatherhood? Now, generally speaking, social contract wise, right? What does a man want? I answered the question from a traditional perspective. So before I ask the rest of the panel, so I'm just gonna state it again that it's in West African community is respect. That's it. Respect, whether father, husband, blah blah. A man equals respect. That's what a man wants. Give him that, and he'll do what he needs to do in order to move society forward. As an individual man, what else, or do you agree, or what does a man need for this social contract to work?
Obedience and cooperation. Without that, it's not going to work. You cannot have conflict in anything. You can't have somebody second guessing you in front of the children if you want to be an effective father. You also can't have somebody with the authority to end or marginally disrupt your fatherhood, and are willing to do so, and be an effective father. You can't. You need from a mate. You definitely need cooperation and obedience.
Very good, very, very, very good, sir. So, Dr. Thunder, if you can start getting ready the 27-minute mark, because so we talked about the 60s. We talked about welfare being introduced, this deal, which is a great deal. Hey, I don't have to submit and I get the money. Hey, why not? And even if I'm particularly insightful that I can look down into the future and say, hey, this might screw up the community a few generations down, most people are still going to be like YOLO, right? Like, hey, I'm not going to be around, right? I'm talking about this, like, it's my time to get this check, right? And probably you're going to like add some rose, you're going to look at it with rose colored glasses, be like, it's probably not going to mess things up anyways. Now, the way in which things have been messed up seems to be has been disproportionately on the male side of things. In other words, it would seem like men are suffering more from this broken family situation, at least on the surface. When it comes to tangible things that you can measure, such as the level of reading and certain other kinds of things, right? So it would seem like, okay, you have these uh, there's no father there. The mother is probably closer to the daughter. The son reminds the mother of the dad, and he ain't no good or whatever. And the son has to deal with certain things that the daughter doesn't have to deal with. Let's say maybe violence in the community. There's certain, and on and on and on. And men seem to be suffering more from this. And then there's a question about what is to be done about the current crop of men who have grown up in this particular situation. And if you could just play this clip and then we'll kind of talk around that, because this is about possible solutions for what has happened so far.
Are just not educational material. And that's why in the book I have a couple of chapters on vocational training, and many of these, when someone speaks about vocational training, they think about plumbers and carpenters. These are kids that don't have the skills to become that. They may not even have the skills to become air conditioner repair men. As someone mentioned, you need a 10th grade reading to go through the manuals for these more sophisticated machines that have to be repaired. So they often may have to start with pretty low level certificate programs, which they can build on. And it could be the first time that they have a positive outcome in their educational experience when they complete a certificate program. And these certificates are stackable. So you get one, gets you a low level entry position, but then you pass the second certificate and you move up. Uh, the problem with this is no politician, no anti poverty organization is going to get applause for getting kids into low level certificate programs. Now, if you could get them into carpenter programs, yeah, that'll be good. But these low level programs that unfortunately many of these kids have to start in have no upside politically for liberals. It's putting off for a generation the strong middle class. So they'll shove these kids into community colleges if possible.
Hmm. You could pause it
This
there.
seems to
So
be a
we kind
very important and
of get the picture here, where basically it's like, okay, here's where people are at, right? And here's what they need. Some people may have a knee jerk reaction, perhaps, perhaps even out of shame, and say, "Well, how dare you say that that these people can't read and they can't even take that? That's racist. How dare you say that they're not fit for college? That's racist. That's wrong." Or it's not sexy, if you will, politically to talk about these low level, not even carpenter or air conditioner repairman certifications, right? And hey, let's just shove them into this kind of a college thing. Let's just throw big money at it and let's see kind of what happens from there. Now, I want to, as someone, as an educated Dr. Thunder, you've also mentioned things about vocational schools. Well, not necessarily directly vocational schools. We've talked about colleges and how perhaps they're not preparing people for actual work. You've talked about the placement, for example, with your music program and such, right? Work placement, direct placement to work. So why, or what do you think about what was just said? People don't even want to, there's no political appetite for doing things at the lowest level because it seems like an insult. Like, are you saying that these people are not good enough for carpentry, or for college? What are your thoughts about that whole attitude?
I like to go after Dr. Thunder.
Okay.
Yeah, it's interesting. If the certificate program does not impart skills for a particular job, and the employers for that particular job do not respect and or do not respect that certificate program, then that certificate program is more about um, folks making themselves feel good or feel better by doing something, though what it is that they're doing is ineffective. So they're spinning their wheels, and those that are participating in these programs are not actually benefiting. Okay, they're doing something. They're not in the street. So okay, so maybe it's positive in that sense. Okay, but they're not actually gaining any skills. So that's one sort of nuance to this. Another thing is, um, there is seems to be this sort of uh, what is it, the bigotry of low expectations. So why is it that you would be doing certificate programs that are training for either jobs that don't exist, or training um, such a low level skill as to be wasting time when you could be training people carpentry skills, or skills associated with plumbing or electrician, or some prerequisite, some precursor to being an electrician, or a long list of things. So it's like uh, this is one of the reasons why you can't win for losing. It's really hard. It's really hard to find the sort of sweet spot in a lot of these issues because, um, yes, you want a particular outcome. You want more education. You want people to have more access to jobs so that they can gain a quote unquote living wage and all that kind of stuff and pull people out of poverty and all this kind of stuff. You want to do that. That's great. Um, but you're sort of disarmed by um, some of the kind of logistics associated with this, and or like I said, this sort of uh, bigotry of low expectations. I mean, why would you be trying to train folks to do stuff that is not in any job? That doesn't make any sense. I mean, this is not even a college education, right? I'd argue a lot of stuff that happens in college is not stuff that you actually use on the job, but at least it still has a certain level of prestige where people actually think it means something. This is something
Let me
that
ask you
people
something
don't
here.
think that means anything. Plus, it's not imparting anything meaningful. That's silly.
How about this gap here? Are we missing a gap? Because it seems to be that the guy is saying that they're not ready to read those air conditioner training manuals, right? And these are the people we're talking about, right? So they are not
Well,
even ready. They
perhaps,
can't read the 10th grade manual. Yeah, go ahead.
yeah, well, perhaps that's the case, but part of that I think falls in that bigotry of low expectations. I think if you're not willing to challenge folks wherever they are, you're never going to get the smarter people, more capable folks. You're never going to inspire the ones that have the natural ability, that have the potential to get to the next level, regardless as to where they are, what their reading level is, or whatever else. I mean, you can't help that. Um, and yeah, and I'd argue that there's probably a bunch of these training programs that actually don't require a lot of reading skills. I mean, you
Hmm.
could train people how to do all kinds of things. Boys tend to learn hands on. So, anyhow,
Shout out to the super chat, right?
yeah,
Mr.
thank you very much, Mr. Me Too, with the big support. Thank you very much. Support Black Men Media, especially our PhDs as usual. Thank you for y'all insight.
All right, game changer, go ahead.
Okay, thank you. I think that it's a vast misunderstanding when we try to say that the trades is low expectations. The fact of the matter is that it's actually these are very, very, very high paying jobs, more so than most jobs that would yield you an education. I think the problem with modern society in dealing with the trades is that they're a little confused with money and status. You see, yes, college degrees will get you certain jobs of or in a position of status, and you can have the bragging rights that Dr. Thunder was talking about. However, the true money is in the trades. Anybody who's ever needed air conditioning repair knows that it's not a cheap thing. The labor cost outside of the Freon is substantial, maybe like $100 to $200 an hour. And most college educated jobs outside of STEM and even within STEM don't really pay $100 to $200 an hour. So yeah, the trades definitely is a lucrative thing, but society looks down upon tradesmen for whatever reason. People tend to prefer a doctor who makes 250K over a plumber that makes 500K. That's just the way we perceive things. I think that perception is why the trades aren't as popular. Also, we really shouldn't. We're in a state of red alert when we are talking about trade schools and teaching young men trades through an academic process. Things like air conditioning repair and plumbing, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Usually, and there was a time when things was like that was taught from father to son, or at least locally. Like, so by the time that he graduates high school or didn't graduate high school, he would have a substantial trade. He would be, whatever his father's trade was, would have been passed on to him, and he would be prepared, giving him a significant head start in life. That unfortunately is no longer the case, and young men are set behind, because they have to learn what they could have learned under their father's hood in the garage.
Hmm. And point of
I just wanted to clarify quickly. I hope that
mhm,
my comments were not taken to mean that I think that I mean, I tell folks, if you don't need a college education, there's no point in going to college. There's too many better ways and more efficient ways to make money, um, and trades are at the top of that list. And so I think that uh, more folks should go the trade school route. But I think what's being said here, though, is they were offering these certificate programs that didn't actually get them any access to any of these trades, but they were some sort of precursor that didn't actually lead to anything. And so now they can say that they're doing something, but what it was that they were doing wasn't actually preparing them for anything. And so not only does it not have any prestige like going to college, but it also doesn't get you a trade. It doesn't get your foot in the door with respect to trades. And if you're going to use the argument that, well, they're illiterate, they can't read and like this, to your point, game changer, um, really the way to teach folks is the hands-on thing, and that's how boys learn better anyway. So that all of that stuff is seems to be set up as a way to make an excuse for why we're not sort of pushing in that direction. Just wanted
mhm.
to restate.
Yep. Yes, 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 yes. So yes, what is being discussed here is, and to give credit to the gentleman whom is not here to defend himself, he did say that these certificates are stackable. Now I don't know where they stack to. They might stack to nowhere, right? But he did say that
Mhm.
that they're stackable. But it seems like one needs to look into the actual uh, programs that are being discussed here. Now, LAR, you know, comment on the on this whole education thing, but kind of like a precursor to that was what I mentioned about. It seems like men are disproportionately affected by the state of the family, right? In the sense that, okay, well, sure, somebody took a deal, family got broken apart, but it seems like men are being disproportionately affected. Is is that by design, or is that just kind of like a natural thing where it seems like, well, men need the fathers more, or in a society without, or in a group without fathers, or in a family without fathers, and there isn't that spirit of stoicism, right, which is required or which needs to be passed down, that the son will not. You see what I'm saying here? So men are disproportionately affected. Is that true? What are your thoughts about that? And then what's to be done here? Somebody suggested these remedial programs, stacking up certificates and whatnot. Well, go ahead, Eliar.
Yeah, you could say that the boys are affected disproportionately because, like Dr. Thunder said, it's not boys learn better with hands-on training, but beyond hands-on training, it's also the 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 time to show somebody. The school doesn't do hands-on. The school does. I'll tell you this, do that, and I'll take it a step further by saying I think a lot of men are more wiser about how the world works and how society works because most men are out in the world. So you wind up having a boy being trained on life in an air conditioned environment outside of where everything is moving around, as opposed to a boy trained, you know, outside in the world where everything is, how can I say, you can see the consequences of positive and negative behavior. It's not a fantasy, it's not a fairy tale. Because what you wind up getting is a bunch of young men who, in actuality, have a female mind in some ways and are looking for a man to come figure it out for them because they don't know that it's their job to, go from point A to point B. And that's where you get the trade part. That's why that's dwindled down over the years, because in all actuality, you don't see a lot of people working with their hands anymore. You don't see anybody working in adverse conditions anymore. Society has gotten that soft to the point that, like Game Changer said, it's more prestige to have an education, but what good is you making, let's just say 60 a year working in an air conditioned environment and somebody's making 85 working outside? Prestige ain't really gonna do much for you as a guy. Not with that difference. But that's my thought.
Yeah, well put there. Well put, ladies and gentlemen. Go ahead and click that like button, share the stream. This is Case Closed. Yes. And if you have not subscribed to this channel, go ahead and subscribe. It's 4 p.m. 4 p.m. That's when it starts every Sunday, Eastern time. That is 4 p.m. Eastern every Sunday. Now, while you get that last number queued up, Dr. Thunder, I want to ask Game Changer. I think it was like 33 or whatever. You may have it. Yeah. But I want to ask Game Changer something about the 1960s, which is one of the first clips that we played here regarding, well, what happened in the 1960s, right? It seems to be the case that, okay, black families were, what happened vis-a-vis black families, right? Black families were strong, marital rates, divorce rates, all those other kinds of things. And they were poor, right? Same poverty, then 60s happened. And yet people speculate that it's the welfare program. And somebody took the deal, which Dr. Thunder has said, hey, you know what? It is given human nature. Of course, they're going to take the deal. Okay, forget what you would have done. Everybody knows you're holy, right? But if you take a group of people, what are they going to do disproportionately? They're going to take the deal, right? So, Game Changer, just your comment there on what do you think happened in the 1960s? Because there are people who say, hey, no, it was not welfare. There wasn't enough welfare. That's why. Or what's all this stuff about family and stuff aligned with the whole idea of fathers being obsolete? Family is also obsolete. What is all this? I'm going to repeat myself. Cisgender, heteronormative BS. It's about resources. It's not about any, you need to give the people the resources. It's about these billions of dollars and all those other kinds of things. So what do you think happened in the 1960s? Was it the welfare program? You muted, sir?
Is this question for
Sorry
Game
about
Changer?
yeah. No, I was
Yeah,
on
yes.
mute.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Go ahead. Go ahead.
Most certainly by itself, it was not the welfare program. I know it seems that way, but it's not. It's simply how it was used, and it was weaponized. I mean, we must understand, in understanding welfare, we must first understand, excuse me, that it always existed in some form. Or I shouldn't say always, but since the 1920s, it has existed in some form. This is a post World War One program that was primarily designed for widows, and in a form of quantitative easing for the American economy. If a farmer is making food, that food doesn't stop being generated if just because the people can't afford to buy it. So subsequently, they say, okay, we will bridge the gap. This will keep the farmers farming, and this will keep the store clerking, etc., and this will keep the population fed. So it was around for quite some time. And Malcolm X even talked about his mother, which was a very long time ago, well before the '60s when he died, was on welfare. But she, it's so, just to be clear, it was something that was there. It didn't just pop up in the '60s and black women say, oh, this is an opportunity to disconnect the family. No, the desire to disconnect the family or to disjoin the family came far after welfare. Now, of course, I wasn't here for the '60s, but in my assessment, I think that, and if we look at all the things that were happening at the time, I think one of the main factors, one of the driving factors of welfare was the Great Migration. And for those of you who don't know, the Great Migration is the migration that Black people had from the South to the urban cities. Cities like Oakland, where I'm from, Chicago, Detroit, Baltimore, yeah, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Women of all races has this romantic fantasy about large cities. They do. They gravitate towards them like moths to the flame. They love it, the lights, whatever, for whatever reason. Maybe because they're social creatures and they prefer the company of a high concentration of people. Now, um, not everybody is cut for the big city. Not everybody is made for New York. Not everybody can compete in such a place. So, what, and once again, in my opinion, what I feel happened was a lot of women just seen it as a way to, okay, I want to live in New York City. I want to move from Alabama to California, to Compton. I don't care. I don't care what it takes. I'm going to do it, and that's what it took. They actually left the South and they brought their pregnancy with them and left some, Alabama guy, not even, probably not even knowing that these childs exist. So I think that that's part of it. Like, you it was just a way to cheat the system. It was a way to cheat being in a big city where you probably, your skill set, your mentality probably wouldn't have put you otherwise. So I think that that's part of it. Now, another thing is the reason why it sustained so long, and why, because a person could rightly be in the system and maintain a family. In fact, and I've seen it done. In fact, the system would help to maintain the family. I think one of the key things is the way the way that it's set up. It's not really set for long term marriages, arrangements, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Okay, so, and I said this on another channel before, but in order for a woman to properly abuse the welfare system, she needs three men. The first being the man that impregnates her. And this could be anybody, Tom, Dick, or Harry, or any Tom with a Harry. Well, never mind. But this could be anybody that she can use to impregnate it, and he doesn't even have to know that the child exists. That's the first guy. The second guy is one that stays with her and gives her the provisions that the welfare system does not give her. And that is a guy who can't afford his own apartment, but he can't afford a car, where she is kind of like a 50-50 relationship. It's just that the government is providing her 50 and he's providing the remaining 50 from himself. This guy cannot be overly successful, because why would somebody, like, say, the lead attorney, if he's still here, or Ike, or Dr. Thunder, or LAR, or myself, why would we move to a ghetto acorn project apartment in West Oakland? It wouldn't make sense for us as homeowners to do something like that. So it can't be that guy. It has to be a guy who would not sustain without her, and but he has enough provisions of his own to bring to her, i.e., card, Christmas gifts, and weed on the weekends. Oh, and get her hair and nails done. So he provides that function. Now, the third guy comes in when welfare ends. This is, when the children are 15, 16, but she sees that they will soon be 18. So she must leave this guy in order to get to the final guy. And then that is when people like LAR becomes more appealing, because, she needs somebody to actually put her up. She went from the 50-50 dynamic that I was describing to the, I need somebody to take care of 100% at this time. So, because the system is not consistent, her dating pattern isn't consistent while in this system, if that makes sense. So I think that that's largely what happened. It's the mentality behind it, and also there were several drivers that changed the culture for Black people, particularly Black women. So with the civil rights era, you had a group of people who were bucking the social norm, and then after that, in the '60s, they were like, okay, we just went through a drastic political change through this method. Let's make another drastic political change. And because the people, and this is the last thing I'm going to say with this, because the welfare system caters to young women of fertile years, you also have the mentality of a young woman who is rushed into womanhood, who, when she don't really, okay, so 16, 17, was when these girls are getting pregnant. Also, at the same time, and we all were at that stage in life where we looked at parental rulership as oppressive, as why are these people telling me what to do? Why are these, and you wanted to rebel against that. You wanted to rebel against the parent-child dynamic. So that is when they leap into adulthood. They already want freedom, liberty, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera at that age. And that's when they make the decision to emancipate themselves through pregnancy. But they're not finished growing up, and they kind of, remain in a state of adolescence for quite some time.
Mhm.
I know that was a
So,
long answer.
yeah, that was all put. One of the things that was mentioned when we played the clip earlier was the idea of jobs. Now, they did not expound upon it regarding the rural urban aspect, but that's kind of part of the. I thought of that when they were saying it. So, thanks for bringing that up, Dr. Thunder. Before you play this other clip here, what it's gonna talk about really is more along the lines of the soft bigotry of low expectations that you highlighted earlier, right? So if the idea is, okay, well, look, something needs to be done, going into the future, or shall we say, let's say you're the individual man out there, we know what needs to be done, right? Which is, you go out there and you choose from a crop of people that are not going to screw you up, it's going to screw you over, and everybody has their ways of deciphering that. Some people decide to get a passport, whatever, right? However, for the people whom are still here, in other words, not for the people, but like the kids, the offspring of these people coming out of these particular kinds of families, there is the notion of, oh, we cannot. Let's put them into college, but let's pretend like we don't see their deficiencies. Let's pretend like we don't see their deficiencies. Let's pretend like we are not supposed to raise the standard and force them to rise above, right? Um, it's exemplified by what the gentleman said earlier about people not liking the uh, uh, certificate programs, despite the other things that are wrong with the certificate programs, is the fact that people are just saying, oh, well, what do you mean certificate programs? Let's put them in college, without addressing the fact that, well, they really can't read. So this what's about to play here is about, what happens when they do get put in community colleges, of which, even before, I think it's less than 20, it's about 20% now, the retention rate, the graduation rate of community colleges. So you have people whom are not being trained to do something. They're not in school or working. They collected a Pell Grant and, bought a Ford Bronco, and, and souped it up with some nice speakers or whatever. And this is not where you would this is not the ideal situation, right? Overall. But let's go ahead and play that clip if you will, Dr. Thun.
All right, here we go.
Have much more social promotion going on, even at Brooklyn College. Just to give an example, um, the community colleges, you had to take remediation if you didn't have a level of math and English. And it was keeping people from getting out of the community colleges, the math in particular. So they just dropped that requirement. You don't have to get through remediation. You just go into courses. So you had a lot of students now graduating who had marginal math skills, and they wanted to go into business. Well, business, you have to take finance, you have to take economics courses. They were failing these courses. So what did they do? They first said, well, we'll give more student help and this and that. That didn't work. So then they identified faculty who were disproportionately giving low grades to Black and Latino students. This is explicit. They identified the faculty who were giving low grades, and they offered these faculty counseling, like re-education. I'm seriously. That's
Wow.
what. Now, what happened? Immediately, you got grade inflation. So
Sure.
I, when I taught, it was I had a struggle not to give 20, 25% of the introductory micro students something less than a C minus or a drop. Because that's the student body. And I would be successful in a variety of ways to get down to 15 or so. I talked to a
Wow.
colleague now, 75% of the students to 80% of the students in introductory micro get at least a B or an A. That was the result of this threat by the administration that if you're identified as one of these low graders, we're going to re-educate you.
So, Dr.
But,
Thunder,
I see the
I
picture. You could write the novel.
I figured you'd get a kick out of that one. But so as we're landing the plane here, as we're landing the plane here, this kind of takes us into somewhat affirmative action territory. It's not explicitly affirmative action, but the spirit behind it is, look, rather than address the underlying deficiency in some skill, math or whatever, yay, force them to repeat the classes, make some allowances. Hey, you can take this course again. You take it for free. Give them more help. Blah blah blah. Whatever it takes. Whatever it takes. There is the. It's not politically expedient. It is not sexy again. And then there's some people who perhaps really deeply believe that all this stuff is just, math is just the white man's language anyways, the white man trying to keep the black man down and blah, blah, blah. We're more rhythmic and flowy and intuitive and all this math stuff, that all this white physics, the different ways of knowing. How about our way of knowing and all that kind of stuff? Right? And so end up, these people are not being trained correctly and they're being forced through the system, and they're not gonna, and this will get reflected in perhaps income numbers or some of the kind of glass ceiling that they'll face later on down the line, or they get into the college and they can't perform. In the 4-year college, they can't perform, they drop out, or they get into the workforce and they're not keeping up, they drop out, that kind of a thing. What are your thoughts about this approach? In other words, we seem to be saying here, okay, let's raise the standard, right? You say, hey, none of this BS low level certificates that are not leading anywhere. Let's raise the standard. What does that look like? Because, hey, I'm all about that. I'm all about, hey, don't be a BAN. I'm all about, hey, if you're not, whatever complaints you're talking about and the stigma, it's like, hey, the stigma is not keeping you from opening that calculus book, right? I don't want to, especially if we're talking about men here. And again, we're talking about that men spirit of stoicism. One of the important aspects of there are things you cannot change. So, there's a black underclass and there's a stigma about, okay, there's nothing you can do about that. How about this calculus book, right? So, what are your thoughts so far, Dr. Thunder? Is that the approach that you want to continue with? In other words, hard-lined, raise the standard, whatever it takes to raise the human potential of these people? What are your general thoughts?
Yeah, so I think it's a multifaceted. This is multifaceted. Okay, so on the one side of it, you have to continue to raise the standard. Okay, because I think your point is well taken. Whatever the systemic barriers are, does that prevent you from opening this calculus book? But I take that point. However, we do have to talk about the way that things are being taught. And when we talk about black boys who are not able to, on average, are not with the same level of reading skills, and a lot of that is because their dads are not around. It's not directly because their dad's not around. For instance, in my household, my wife does most of the homework stuff with my son, and she's cracking the whip. But the reason that she's able to focus and give that kind of effort is because she doesn't have to, she doesn't have to do what I'm doing to bring in the money, to do all this other stuff, and to provide the stable environment. She doesn't have to worry about that part, so she can focus in on, hey, we got to make sure he can do this. Okay. So there can be direct consequences because perhaps you could say men are more analytical and perhaps when he gets to a certain level in school, then some of the mathematics kind of stuff that I'll switch to start helping him with, right? But the point is that the father's being there is critical, and when the father is not there, you're creating all these other circumstances. So then you're going to have to figure out how to address those issues, which are directly related to getting enough black boys in particular. I like to focus on that demographic, to getting enough black boys in this sort of pipeline, as it were. But then also you have to start talking about the educational system that exists, and rather than them being so focused on this methodology and approach that they've been using all this time, that is jointly culpable for the results, right? For they need to change the way that they're teaching these subjects, so that more of the boys will be served, right? So you have that side of it. You have the other side of it. Yes, systemic stuff, fine, but how does that prevent you from opening this book? Now, what's interesting about that? One of the things that my dad taught me, which probably is the most important, the most valuable thing that he could have shown me. Okay, and he taught me a lot of stuff that is very practical, very useful. Okay, probably the most important thing, most important principle is to not make excuses. Okay, so what that means is, regardless as to how much this is kicking my butt, regardless as to if I don't feel like I have the adequate resources, regardless as to what the circumstance is, somebody else has an easier time, whatever that stuff is, none of that stuff matters. You know, stop making excuses and get the work done. You know, and the thing is that if the dads are not around, and if that's some of the kind of impartation that the dad is going to give to the boys in particular, then now so then how are you actually going to fault these boys for not opening the calculus book when everyone else is telling them that, you know, you're dumb, you don't even read at an 8th grade level, blah blah blah, all this other kind of stuff, and they don't even have their dad in their ear and saying, stop listening to that, I don't give a crap about any of that, get in here and get to work. See, that is of critical importance. If the boy doesn't have anyone um insisting that he open the book, why is he going to open the book? You know, because I think one thing that we have to be careful to not do is, those of us that had our dad around, and our dad was the one that was lighting the fire under our butt and making us do stuff, right? I think we have to be careful not to use that as an excuse. I'm sorry, not as an excuse, but not to unfairly judge folks that did not have that benefit and how great of a benefit that is. You could be abject poverty. If you have your dad in your life, you're going to be all right.
Mm-hmm.
Go ahead.
And it seems like that's probably the hood conservative, right? Trying to
Yes,
cover
it
up his
is.
camera. He's
Yeah,
not
yeah.
used to the e-cam life.
Let me
Yeah, I don't
let me
typically
pull.
cam up, and there is like no simple function.
Yeah, yeah. I'm gonna find a picture for you in
And I
just a
see
second.
everybody else has a logo up.
Yeah, yeah.
Okay,
I'm gonna
yeah.
find something for you.
Nothing unflattering, please.
Uh, all right, all right, all right. So LAR, and then I'm gonna have to drop off here, and but let me just address this to LAR and game changer. In other words, where we're at right now is what needs to be done in terms of, or in terms of raising that standard versus saying, hey, are these standards unfair? Right. And people whom say, hey, let's put the teachers in counseling so that they give the kids better grades versus, hey, if they fail, they fail because what's important is that this community, the standards in this community needs to be raised and it's going to be better for everybody, especially the future and all that kind of stuff, right? And we've heard what Dr. Thunder has said, kind of broken down a little bit. But LAR and then Game Changer, okay? And I'm sure the Hood Server has a whole lot of things that he's been listening to the conversation. He's going to add this, that, and the other. But I do have to drop off, ladies and gentlemen. It's I have some engagements and great conversation so far, by the way. And if I may, before I leave, just kind of give a brief recap of where we started and how we got here.
Absolutely.
The idea, yeah, the idea basically is: look, okay, we're talking about what do men require in order to take on this responsibility. Are is the role of a father overrated? Is it just a physical, material thing, such as protection, provision? And if we can protect the women and the child and provide for them, then what's the point of the father? We identify that the man needs respect in order to perform these tasks and also pass on the virtues required for performing these tasks, which we call the virtues of stoicism. And without the virtues of stoicism, you cannot survive in the external world. Whether you're because the external world doesn't give a crap. And the virtues of stoicism is how you deal with stuff that doesn't give a crap, stuff that's trying to kill you, stuff that doesn't care. The earth is not a hospitable place, by the way, right? If you've ever, seen, Dr. Thunder, you're out there in the Midwest, you'll die out there in the winter, right? It's not like the
Yeah.
earth wants to kill you in many different ways. And it takes stoicism to say, hey, these are things I cannot change. How do I go out there and conquer them, deal with them, no excuses, so on and so forth, whether it's the barbarians at the gate or a cold winter, the need for shelter, protection, provision, all those other kinds of things. And there's a spirit, there's a philosophy, there's a whole kind of mode of being that goes along with that, that is the man's domain, is the man's purview. And we talked about the fact that certain communities, as you say, the black community, the state of the black family is such that there seems to be a diminishment or diminution of the role that the father plays, a lack of understanding of respect that the man requires. Or as Eliar put it, maybe it's not a lack of understanding, it's just people just want to be rebellious and so on. And then here we are with men or boys being disproportionately affected by this whole milieu, right? And then what is to be done about these group of boys is where we're at right now. And Eliar is going to tell us something about that. But ladies and gentlemen, I'm going to have to dip out. Thank you all. Until next time, peace.
All right,
Peace.
Ike. And let's do this. Hood Servative, why don't you we'll have you talk twice. So why don't you say whatever you'd like to say about the conversation thus far, and then we'll go around and get everyone's closing remarks, and then you'll do a closing remark also. So go ahead.
Oh, dang, I missed the good stuff. Thanks for having me up here. I like these conversations you have. To answer the question directly, no, fatherhood as a function, as a title, whatever you want to describe it as, I don't think it's obsolete at all in the world. I think fatherhood gets in the way of the desires of certain other people, or maybe certain there are maybe certain agendas at play where fatherhood would gum up the works of this particular agenda. So if you're an actual card carrying feminist, there's absolutely no reason for you to value traditional fatherhood. I mean, that's patriarchy. That's everything you've been trained to hate. And then there's the other side of, like, if you kind of raised up in this sort of feminist induced environment where, like, the women they can exist free of men. The women can exist away from men without any real effort, because the government will make a way, the government will even the playing field, or just give them money outright. And living like kind of creates this environment. It's sort of like the whole no dad in the house law from back in the 70s. What was the movie Claudine or whatever, where there was that
Yeah,
famous scene that
yep,
he had to leave and
yeah,
hide from the welfare worker?
out of the closet.
That in and of itself creates this idea that, yeah, yeah, and that creates this idea of I don't need a man. But really, in both cases, the man is just getting in the way of somebody else's good time or plan or whatever. But no, I don't think the father, is obsolete. I think the world is just trying to make the father obsolete because everybody wants to, everybody has a different agenda other than patriarchy, apparently.
Yeah. All right, game changer. Why don't you give us your closing remarks here?
Okay, so on the educational thing, it's really, I don't see much wrong with the educational system other than its fear of tracking students. In the sense that they don't want to, take a group of exceptional students and um, or remove the students that cause distractions in classrooms. You see, in the Black community, unfortunately, and this is largely for the reasons that we discussed previously, and the single mother epidemic, welfare, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, a lot of parents are trash, and as a result of that, because the only discipline a school institution can inflict on a child is, I'll send you to your parents, I'll suspend you, basically they have the parents dish out the discipline. However, most in the Black community don't. So if a young lady wishes to pepper spray her teacher for not putting, for attempting to confiscate her phone, she pepper sprays her teacher twice. What is the school going to do? They're going to send her home, and the mama say, oh, he tried to take your phone. It's good. I'm glad you got him. So and in the meantime, the other 29 students in the class are missing that particular time of education. During that hour, they are falling behind. Where, in an institution, let's just say somewhere in Asia or Africa, where, the kids are sitting there, hands folded for the entire hour, are winning. They are moving ahead. They are becoming more academically disciplined, and they are learning. So they won't fall behind in reading, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, because they're not being distracted by, let's just call it, nagaga chit. They're not being, the class isn't chronically interrupted by such things. So what's happening is, because of the high concentration of students like that who are, being, which is being condoned by obsolete parenting, it's affecting all students. There are students who not necessarily are eager to learn, but are willing to learn if there weren't any distractions in the class. They can't learn in such an environment. What needs to be done is you have to separate somebody like that, like the pepper spray girl, from the other students. But they are unwilling to do that because then they would be called tracking racism, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So I think that that's a fundamental problem. But other countries are, as far as the educational system goes, are doing far more with less.
All right. Before you go, LAR, like, share, comment, subscribe, become a channel member where you'll get access to all archived videos. Support black male media, support independent media. Super chats enabled. Super thanks for the replay gang. Cash App, Venmo, PayPal, Dr. Thunder Music, all one word. Spell out the word doctor, and you can see I've got the sandwich gang in the bottom left corner there if you'd like to contribute to my post workout sandwiches. You can join the sandwich gang. Shoot a Cash App. Go ahead, LAR.
Okay. When it comes to education, I think the issue is hypocritical. Um,
Mm.
Schools want bodies; they don't want excellence. And then when you look into it, the way they do things is actually not uniform. It's person to person, group to group. And what I mean by that is, I got family members that have been teachers for decades, right? So what happens is, you get a group of students that they coddle, and then you get a group of students that they don't. And the thing is, you need to earn whatever you earn your A's, you earn your F's. But they have particular people in particular schools and teachers who play favorites and biases when they're teaching. So one kid earned a C, they might have got a D. One kid earned a C, they might have got a B. And this is the same classroom. So at the end of the day, you really don't know who's actually who as far as intelligence, because you got the teachers in the schools playing games and favorites with individuals. And when it comes to the boys, that's part of the issue. Like with the boys in particular, I'll say I believe most schools are concerned with if the boy can throw for 300 yards, get 100 yards rushing or receiving, or put up 20 and 10, because it pays, because the ticket sales for the school and the merchandise helps. So they don't care about you, for being an excellent student. They care about you for being a producer for the school. The valedictorian doesn't have as much sway as the students that won the state championship when the years go by. That's for a reason. So when I look at it, it's like school isn't necessarily important, and a lot of parents don't make it any better, because you wind up in a situation where you just want the kid to graduate too. The smart thing to do is if your kid's passing, make sure they pass. If your kid's failing, make sure they fail, so they have to do it again. Let them realize, oh, I don't want to play around and do this again and again. That's what I mean by the school system is kind of is not being uniform. This idea that you should make it a thing where, okay, think about it. If you're 19, 20 years old and still in high school, it's not because you're cool, it's because you're stupid. You should have went to summer school. You should have stopped failing. And your parents should have stopped letting you not go to summer school. In the school, should have not let you, how can I say this? You do realize you could play football and basketball at right about 20 years old in high school, but you can still go to school. They learn the sports program learned to cut you off at a certain point because you shouldn't be there. The schools need to do that too, but they don't. And, and to me, that's a broader issue. But I'm done.
Yeah. Yeah, it's interesting. One thing before Hood Conservative, you give your final remarks. One thing that we don't that is not talked about very much is the fact that, and this has been for a long time. This is not late breaking news. This is not from a news study. This is stuff that has been this way at least for the last 30, 40 years, maybe for longer. And that's the fact that uh, in high school, the class valedictorians and uh, class presidents are 93% female. 93% of the high school valedictorians and class presidents are female. 93%. Now, that sounds to me to be more than just these boys are a hot mess. That sounds to me that it has been designed as a way to promote a particular thing. Okay? And so not acknowledging that, I think, is a problem in whatever we think the solution is. And that's with fathers in the home or fathers not in the home. So imagine how much black boys in particular are going to be underserved when the system is already designed for them to only be 7% of valedictorians and class presidents as boys, right? Go ahead, Hood Conservative.
Yeah, I was actually gonna kind of pick up off the same point you and Eliar were just doubling down on. You were talking about this earlier, and I wrote in the chat. I don't think these numbers are accidental. I'm way beyond thinking. I don't even believe in coincidence anymore. I'm just so woke. Nothing's a coincidence, right? And so it's not it's not feasible, like you said, this 90 something percentage of women graduating in leadership roles. You realize, and again, this is a point I made yesterday on my stream and then on Bernard's stream right after that. If you haven't sacrificed a child and destroyed a man's life, are you really doing feminism? Because that's what I see in that 93 percentage. Somebody got sacrificed or destroyed. There is no way in hell that you can have women outcompeting men. Since when do women actually outcompete men at such high numbers without a guy getting his nuts clipped? It's impossible. It's unheard of. And so this has to be on purpose. And not don't even get me started on Pride Month. Like the schools are hella corrupt. I don't know if there's an institution short of the actual federal government that's more corrupt than the modern public school system. And I have no faith in anything coming out of there at this point. But yeah, I guess we're going to end on that horrible note. But thank you for having me up here, Doc.
Absolutely, man. Anytime, man. You're always welcome. And thanks to the panel. Happy Father's Day. Happy Father's Day. Fathers don't get enough respect and love and admiration. Um, you know that Chris Rock bit that he did years ago, and I've seen some comedians do it again, where they talk about what are the most most popular holidays, and of course, number one, the most popular holiday, of course, is Christmas. That's number one. Number two is Mother's Day. And then way down on the list after Arbor Day, and folks don't even know what Arbor Day is Father's Day. So let me be at least a voice that you hear saying Happy Father's Day. And please know that what it is that you're doing as fathers is of critical importance. And it's the best thing, it's the best thing that I do. I told my son yesterday that it was the best day of my life when I learned I was going to be a father. And we brought him home from the hospital. That was the best day of my life. And it totally changed everything. And the sense of sort of meaning and value and purpose and all of that I derive from being a dad is like nothing else. And so, yeah, and I think about my own dad and how important my dad has been in my life, and how nothing that I do would I be able to do without him. He made everything possible. Thanks, Dad. And on that note, we will see you next time. Peace. Peace out.